Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, Part 4, the running back player profiles. Hit the description of this video or podcast, and you can find Parts 1, Parts 2, and Parts 3. Shockingly enough, we went in chronological order of this series. If you want to smash the like button of the episode and leave your DraftKings handle in the comment section, along with one running back, regardless of price, you will never draft because they're hexed or cursed. And the answer can be Mark Ingram if you're right, because that is probably the right answer to this question, as people who watch the Pat Mayo Experience know. You do that, you're in a draw for 20 DK bucks. You want to get into a draw for 100 DK bucks? Subscribe to the Pat Mayo Experience audio podcast. Leave a 5-star review, DraftKings handle, something you enjoy about the Pat Mayo Experience, and you're going to be in that draw. You can use the time codes to jump to the players or situations that you want. You can do that for all of the episodes, and we're going to jump right into it. Chris Meaney from The Athletic is on the line, as he's been for the first 3 parts, and Joe Pisapia, the author of the Fantasy Football Black Book, available for purchase now on Amazon.com, is also on the line. Let's check it out.
The Pat Mayo Experience.
Pat Mayo Experience. Pat Mayo Experience. Pat Mayo Experience. Experience.
In this range, we're going to see a bunch of committee-type running backs as well. So let's dig into those. We've done the standalone players already in terms of the David Johnsons, the Todd Gurleys, guys that we could see, David Montgomery, getting a bulk of volume in their backfields, being drafted in this end of the 3rd, 4th, 5th, early 6th round. So let's talk about some of these timeshares. 1, the devil himself, Mark Ingram, on the Ravens. What did they go out and do? They drafted a better running back than him. Smart for the Ravens, because I'm sure the reason that they lost in the playoffs was probably Mark Ingram related, whether it was his performance or just the hex that he carries around with him. I don't know. They get J.K. Dobbins, Meaney. They also have the Gus Bus on the team, and this guy who rushed for 1,000 yards, Lamar Jackson. This is a highly efficient running back offense, a rushing offense, but they're not afraid to pass to like Jean-Luc Picard near the goal line either. Like just random people that they have on their team that they bring in to score touchdowns for them. Like Ingram I'm curious to see where his overall ADP shakes out, but really with Dobbins in the mix right now, he's still going like 6th round and like pass.
Yeah, I think there's maybe one more productive year from Ingram potentially, but this is a cloudy situation. And you know how much I've liked Ingram over the past couple of years, but this is probably where I pass on him. I do feel like he will be tempting if he's sitting there in the 6th round, but yeah, there's just a lot of options now. They do want to run the football, so that is one positive. You look at the red zone rushing attempts, it was Ingram, 40 red zone rushing attempts. That was top 10 in all of football, but Lamar Jackson's right there with 26. Gus Edwards had 20. So there, you bring in Dobbins, and then Justice Hill even had like a dozen or so. So there's so many options for this team, and I just don't think we'll see Ingram touch the ball 20 times a game. I mean, that towards the end of last year, we started to see his production drop off. He went from a guy who was getting 15 to 17 carries, 1 or 2 catches. And then, when the games mattered into the postseason, into the playoffs, 8 carries, 6 carries, 1, 2 targets. So I think maybe if you're an Ingram owner in a dynasty league, maybe you got one more year, but it's probably a sell high opportunity if you're in that kind of format. But yeah, this is a sticky situation because I think Dobbins actually fits this offense perfectly. I think he can be a potential 3-down back for them. It may take a year, but I think there's no question he has a lot more talent than Mark Ingram.
Yeah, the Dobbins layaway plan, Joe, seems to be what the Ravens are going to go all in on, but they do have an overwhelming amount of options at the running back position that it seems like week to week, where Ingram was the consistent guy last year, it could be someone else this year. Like, would you rather draft Dobbins? Would you rather draft Ingram?
I'd rather draft Ingram, and I know you're going to throw something at me when I say it, but I'm going to say it anyway because I'm not afraid of you, Pat Mayo. Well, I am, just a little bit. But in all honesty, I know we want to crap on Mark Ingram, and I get it. But if he's going to score 10 touchdowns and have 1,000 yards again this year, which I think he can very well do. I remember last year sitting here and fighting, not here on this show, but in a lot of shows, fighting about, forget Mark Ingram, it's Justice Hill. Well, it wasn't. And now we're going to have the same argument. And look, Dobbins is probably better, yes, without a doubt, and certainly more of a threat. But you mentioned Gus Edwards is there too. There's other guys here. I think the thing about Mark Ingram that when you watch the Ravens play, and this is not a fantasy thing, again, this is like a real football acumen thing, is you see how important Ingram was working with Lamar Jackson on the field. You see the conversations they're having off the field. He was almost like another little coach on the field with Jackson. And that was huge for Lamar Jackson as a young quarterback.
Do you
And
know
could
why
see,
Mark Ingram was good last year? Is honestly,
well, they gave him a lot of opportunity.
no,
and they
he
ran
did
the hell out of football.
He did a bunch of PEDs in the offseason. He can't do that. This
Good,
year.
great. I'm doing them right now.
Yeah, he's
just so I
not
can get
doing
better
them
for this
again.
show.
That's the problem. You get him back on the juice, he's going to be fine. But I mean, 15 touchdowns in less than 230 touches, like that efficiency is so off the charts.
It is, but do we think it ends up being 5? No, let's compromise somewhere in the middle at 10 with 1,000 yards, and that is still a pretty damn good back. So is there risk? Yes. Is this another one of these conversations where we're having where I am not the handcuff guy, but is there legitimate reason this year to look at some of these guys and really think about the handcuffs and really concentrate on, you know what, I kind of want to own this backfield because I'm not 100% certain about Mark Ingram's long-term investment in 2020? Yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, let's not let go of what Chris said, which is I think there's one more good year out of Mark Ingram before this transition happens. And I think he becomes the perfect trade candidate if he gets off to a really good start. Trade him off and see what else you can get for him, because I do think the second half, unlike a lot of these other guys we talked about, where I think they're going to be better as the year goes on, I think Mark Ingram will be worse as the year goes on potentially, and will have more threats to his job as the year goes on. But last year, there is no denying when you watch this team play on the field, when you saw them on the sidelines, Mark Ingram being with Lamar Jackson was a huge part of that Lamar Jackson success. And I don't think that's going to get ripped away right away. But over time, because of the age of Ingram, because of where he's at, because of what else is on that roster, it could naturally start to fade away. And that's a thing you have to protect against.
Dobbins or Ingram for you, Meaney?
Honestly, I'll probably just pass on both. But if I had to choose, I would go Dobbins, because I think what Joe is saying is absolutely correct. When, again, we've talked so much about Singletary and Miles Sanders taking over in the second half of the season. I think that's a real possibility. I just don't feel like Ingram's going to get those 20 touches per game that he had last year. I really feel like Baltimore, they were extremely excited to get Dobbins. They valued him as a first-round back, and what I said before is a potential 3-down back, what he can do in this offense is electric. And when I look at Ingram and I look at the top backs that had, were inside the top 10 in red zone rushing attempts, he was super efficient with those carries. And there's two ways that you can go about that. Is nice. He's finding a way to get in the end zone. He did the exact same thing with the Saints. He's a good goal line back, but there's also, again, Lamar Jackson or other backs that they can hand off to. I mean, he had 38% of the team's rushing attempts inside the 20. Other backs that are inside there, 77%, 80, 74, 69. So he was really, really productive despite not getting the bulk of all that usage inside the red zone. So that is my one concern, because he could end up with 10 touchdowns. He really could. But he could also end up with fewer than 200 carries, right? It could just be a touchdown reliant back.
Well, Meaney, he could end up with 8 touchdowns halfway through the year and then 2 the rest of the season. And I think that's the thing you have to protect about. That's the thing you have to take into consideration, that you probably are not going to get a 2020 season of Mark Ingram that is really productive the entire time. I think you're going to get at least a first half of a season, and that is useful. That is important to draft, especially at a value. And then he becomes a very valuable trade chip to a team that has running back issues or has running back injuries, and God knows we're all going to have them. And then if you're smart enough to have Dobbins on that same roster you have, then you've basically hedged your bet. You could trade him off and then see if Dobbins emerges eventually. But again, I heard this noise last year with Justice Hill, and it did not come to fruition. I've heard this noise before with Mark Ingram, and every time Mark Ingram goes out there and plays, he's productive. And I understand it's against everybody's will sometimes, but it is what it is, and it happens every single time he's out there.
So the next backfield that we should talk about, because we need to get rid of Mark Ingram. Too much Mark Ingram talk on this. Don't draft Mark Ingram. Make it easier on yourself, because he'll do to your fantasy team what he did to the Ravens. You'll get into week 14 and be like, he will hex your team and you will lose. That's guaranteed. I remember one year, Meaney, you remember this, when we were both at fantasy. I squared off, and the guy with in the finals, he rode Mark Ingram to the finals. And what did Mark Ingram do in that final game? 0 points. Guess who won the championship?
Yeah, you fucked.
So just pay attention to that. Also, I will say that Mark Ingram is a really good pick if you get bonus points for tripping over the 2-yard line and not scoring a touchdown, or weirdly running out of bounds for no reason when you could find the end zone. Like that, super value in Mark Ingram when it comes down to that. But here's a situation where I don't even know if it's worth investing in, because both these guys are going to be unless we get more clarity We're just not going to know. And that's going to be the difference between Kerryon Johnson and DeAndre Swift in Detroit. Who's going to be the lead back? And I guess, Joe, does it matter who the lead back is?
I'll tell you what, if I'm going to have a choice here, these guys are going to take Swift. I've seen enough Kerryon Johnson already. And even in college, Kerryon Johnson was kind of an inconsistent player at Auburn. You would have these amazing games where you go, oh my God, look at Kerryon Johnson. And other games where you go, well, look at Kerryon Johnson. And I think that this is the perfect opportunity for Swift to come in here. Again, as the season continues to go on, hedge your bets here, take Swift. The problem is Swift was a very highly regarded running back going into the draft, got a lot of hype, a lot of publicity. So I am curious to see just how much of a discount you get on him. He could even be a guy that gets drafted, and if Kerryon Johnson starts off the season, could even get dropped in a lot of leagues. And I think I would be all over picking him up, even if he wasn't playing, because there is no scenario in my mind where 2020 works out to be a year where Kerryon Johnson flourishes as the number one running back by himself in Detroit. I don't see that happening. I think Swift is a superior talent, and I think Swift is going to win out eventually. So again, this is a guy from week 8 on that I'm very interested in owning. If I can get him at a discount, I will draft him. If I can't, forget it. I will just, play my waiver wire pickup, wait for somebody else to drop him. But Kerryon Johnson, really? Do we have to do this again? He was my number one running back, again, overrated going into last year in last year's Black Book, and he did not disappoint. Let's put it that way.
Well, Meaney, the problem is that it seems like Matt Patricia wants to use these running backs like Bill Belichick does in New England, where every
100%.
week it's like someone else. Like, you don't think that we're going to see Bo Scarborough at some point this year?
I think we will.
Like, he'll just randomly have 14 carries in a game. It's like, oh, great.
Yeah, I think we will.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, Matt Patricia will fuck you. And there's no question about it.
Can I get that on a t-shirt?
This is going to be a committee backfield. It really is. And I think we can all agree that Swift is the superior talent here. He's unbelievable. He's explosive. He's the 100 on the Madden. He should have 100 spin rate. He should be the guy, but Matt Patricia will rotate through these backs. It's going to be a committee in Detroit, whether you want it to be or not. Kerryon Johnson has not been able to stay healthy. I agree with Joe. There's no way. I see no scenario where he turns out to be an RB1, even if Swift, who has had injury history before, by the way, in college, even if he does get hurt and he's not around the team, you're right, Pat. Ty Johnson's going to come in there. Bo Scarborough is going to come in there. I think they took another back later. They signed one in Jason Huntley. This is going to be a committee. I don't see any scenario where Swift actually is just a guy who touches the ball consistently 20 to 25 times a game. I think that this is probably what's best for Kerryon, to be honest with you, because he's already proven that he can't handle a full workload. He hasn't been able to stay healthy. Maybe it's a good 1-2 punch, and we see Swift in year 2 be that electric back and is a guy that is a bell cow back. But I think it's going to take some time. So it's an easy fade for me, actually.
Yeah, it's just a situation where I don't think you can get one guy to establish himself as the top guy. Now, if you say, hey, Swift is a 10th round pick, I'm good with that. Eventually, you're going to have to start taking guys that don't have all the volume and hoping that they can emerge into something or just be a highly efficient type of running back. But this situation where I think it's just going to be hard to predict week to week, like it's going to be one of those situations where, Joe, you always see this, and like I think we all see this every week, that you have like the committee guy, and then like you go to DraftKings, he's like $5,600, and everyone's like, this is the guy. And he ends up becoming the chalk for the week. He does nothing. And then the next week, he drops like $500, and everyone's like, don't play that guy. He's horrible. Then he gets like 25 touches and scores 3 touchdowns. Like, that's what this backfield feels like this year.
You just nailed it. That's exactly what this backfield is, I think, going into this year. And that's why I think you can take pieces of it in DFS, but in season long, I think it's one of these backfields to really just kind of pass on. I don't like running backs by committee. This is why I do value guys. It's funny. We talked about Todd Gurley before in this very episode here, and Todd Gurley, you mentioned it. You rattled off the names. There's not a lot of guys fighting there for Todd Gurley shares. And I think that's the thing you look at and go, Todd Gurley's going to play running back for the Atlanta Falcons, and nobody's going to really, take over unless he got hurt and the worst scenario happened. Whereas in this scenario, you don't know even week to week, even half to half or quarter to quarter who the guy's going to be. And both of them have some, issues there. Swift being new and Swift having to learn his way into the playbook and other things and get the confidence of the coaching staff, pass protection, all those things that go into playing running back in the NFL at a high level, especially when you have a veteran quarterback like Matt Stafford making a lot of money, making sure you're able to protect him. And Kerryon Johnson has so many flaws there that I think we've already gone over them ad nauseum. So it's a running back situation for me to stay away from unless I can get Swift cheap. If I get Swift cheap, then I'm going to wait and just bide my time and be patient and hold him on my bench.
And let's not forget that the Lions returned the number 11 fantasy scorer points per game from last year, Wes Hills. 16 points per game in one game last year.
Yeah. I really like Matthew Stafford. I'm just going to have Stafford and Galladay shares, Marvin Jones, wherever I can.
Yeah, I mean, even
the backfield.
even Amendola was pretty good in that offense before Stafford went down. So it's interesting to see. So here's a backfield that's clustered, a lot of the same principles, but it does seem like they just ride the hot hand. But now we have a new name into the mix. They get rid of Matt Breida, but you still have my man, Colonel Mostart, back there. You have Jerick McKinnon, who might make it to week 1 this year. We'll see about that, but he's still on the team. You have Tevin Coleman still. Jeff Wilson Jr. is going to linger. Matt Breida, like I mentioned, in Miami now. But I want to think that Mostart is the guy, Meaney, and that they're going to give him 15 carries per game. But I know that's not going to happen.
I know, as another guy in Kyle Shanahan, right? I mean, we were talking about Patricia not being able to trust him. Kyle Shanahan's another one that you just can't really trust. I will have some shares of Mostart, though. I'm probably going to get suckered into him because of what he did in the second half and the fact that they did get rid of Breida. And I don't believe that Jerick McKinnon is going to be a factor. And I don't really believe in Tevin Coleman. So I think Mostart has earned himself, at least off the get-go, as a guy who should be the RB1 and getting those carries. But again, I say should because we've seen it numerous times. You go back to Atlanta, Kyle Shanahan, there was like so many guessing games between the goal line back there at times, whether it was Freeman or Tevin Coleman, and they'd switch it all up. And so there's no question that this team wants to run the football. They have a great offensive line. Mostart showed that he's explosive. I mean, out of all the backs and backs with at least 150 carries, he led all backs with 5.6 yards per attempt. I mean, there's some solid numbers there. He was even starting to catch some balls. But yeah, you are right to be concerned. At least for me, I do have some concerns that it will be a frustrating backfield. But I'm going to be invested in Mostart because I love the price. It's not an expensive price to pay for him.
So yeah, Joe, if you can get him 5th round, end of 4th, 5th, 6th, that's essentially where Mostart is going right now. All of the early hype seems to have subsided just a little bit. Do you like Mostart?
I actually do.
Yeah,
You talk of those names that you go through there. Number one, they don't really scare me. I mean, if I hear Jerick McKinnon one more time, I mean, come on, man, let's get past that. Tevin Coleman is disappointing every single time to anyone who's ever tried to buy into Tevin Coleman. So at a certain point, like, when do we not look at, even though it might have been limited at times, like Chris pointed out, how efficient Mostart was when he was given the opportunity? So you have these volume guys that we want to kind of build our running backs and fantasy teams around. But then there's also these other guys who are super efficient because not everybody's going to be in an offense or have the opportunity to carry or touch the ball 25 times a game. But a guy like Mostart, if he touches the ball 15 times a game, is going to be efficient doing that and productive. Well, then sign me up. Great offensive line, team that wants to run the football. Even though there are other guys around him, Mostart was the guy that helped them really through that playoff and that bigger push when it was most important. So to me, I think he's the guy who is in front of that pack. And I look at the pack behind him, whereas, I'm looking at Kerryon Johnson. I'm seeing Swift behind him. I don't see anybody like Swift in this backfield that's going to really be a superior talent necessarily. So I think Mostart has a really unique opportunity here to kind of, for lack of a better, pun, run away with the scenario here. But there will always be that presence of the other guys because that's what Shanahan likes to do, and that's fine. It's going to be disappointing sometimes. But as a flex running back, I think Mostert's still a guy you want to own.
Would you want him if you could load up on, let's say you get one of the top 3 picks, and then you went receivers and tight ends or Lamar Jackson or Mahomes, whoever it was, and then all of a sudden Mostart is sitting there in the 5th round as a running back, or potentially even the start of the 6th round. Is that someone that you would feel comfortable with as a running back too if you knew you had one of the top 3 guys?
I think I would, especially when it's coming down to, do I want David Montgomery or do I want Mostart? Because there's Mostart in an offense that was rocking and rolling last year, especially in the second half of the season, and Mostart was part of that. Or Montgomery, who, it's so trudging along and difficult to see the upside. at a certain point with those guys. So I think for me, I'm going to go with the Mostert thing. And I understand that might be unpopular because there's competition, but I also see efficiency there. So if I'm all the way down to the bottom here, I'm looking at the volume guy who's not producing versus the efficient guy who is. I'm going to take the efficient guy who is. And I think the same could be said when you're starting to look at these other spots too, like Jonathan Taylor and Marlon Mack in Indianapolis. There's another scenario too, where let's see how that one develops, because that could be one that we have great clarity on, even maybe as early as week 2 or 3, I think potentially, but that's a dicey situation too. I've seen Jonathan Taylor go above a lot of the names that we've already talked about on these lists, which is another fascinating entity this year.
Well, who have you seen Jonathan Taylor go ahead at this point?
This last group of guys, I've seen him go ahead of Mostert. I've seen him go ahead of as early as head of Le'Veon Bell. Some people I think that's a little crazy, but I have seen him go ahead of, let's see, even on Fantasy Pros in terms of rankings right now, Jonathan Taylor is ranked ahead of David Johnson, ahead of James Conner, and ahead of your boy Mark Ingram even.
I'll go to the athletic mock. He was RB12, Pat. He was
Yeah,
taken in the second
people are
round.
really high on him.
But how do people know? Like, I get that if they come out and say, you know
don't.
what, we're cutting Marlon Mack, Nyheim Hines. With Phillip Rivers, Nyheim Hines is going to be a part of this offense. Now, it might be just like in Chargers days where it's good enough to support 2 guys, the primary pass catching back and the guy on the ground. And I get everything that goes along with that. But if Mack's still getting 10 touches a game, like, Taylor's not going to be a RB1. He's just not.
Well, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong. This is Mack's last year of his deal too. Yes. So I think that might be another situation where they just want to turn the page now.
Yeah, it's possible. There's always 2 ways that you can look at that. Is maybe they give Mack, a few more carries than you expect because it is his last year, and they just work Taylor into the offense. They draft Pittman, they draft Eason. Maybe they decide to turn the offense over in another year and just give some of these other guys an opportunity. But Taylor is, you could make a case for him being the most talented rookie running back out of the entire class. It's just Clyde Edwards-Helaire is in that perfect situation in KC with Mahomes in that offense and Andy Reid. But with Taylor, I mean, he steps into arguably behind the best offensive line in football. But you're right, Pat. Hines is going to be a player in this game, him or Mack. I don't think Mack is going to completely disappear. I think they could run some 2 running back sets. They could have him catching the balls out of the backfield, even though he hasn't. You look at his career log and you see, he hasn't really been that guy's catching balls. I do think that he can catch them. There was some games where he was catching 3 or 4 passes. So he could play that Hines role that we think that Hines is going to play. But yeah, Taylor was, he's probably going to go in the second round. In that athletic mock, he was RB12 and we did 6 rounds and Mostart didn't even go.
Yeah, in our 4-round mock for the Black Book, he's right there in the 4th round there. That's where we have him. Yeah, Taylor. And it's the same thing. It's the matter of looking at the contract situation, looking at another team that's very much win now with Phillip Rivers, and who gives you the best chance to win now? I think the answer is Taylor when you watch these 2 guys, and when you consider, Mack has become kind of expendable here at this point. Some would say, okay, well, maybe they're going to ride Mack into the ground, but I don't think Mack is the kind of back you could do that with.
So the other backfield that we don't really know anything about, Miami. Jordan Howard's there. We have the trade for Matt Breida, who I mentioned. Our Laird in Savior. Shout out to Davis and Pete on that one. But he changed his number. Patrick Laird is still in this mix. Miami, when you look at it per adjusted line yards last year, dead last. Only behind, only the Jets were close to them in being just horrible when it came to run blocking offensive lines. But they've gone out and they've addressed some of these needs. It doesn't look like Tua is going to start right away. But we want to write off Jordan Howard every single year, Meaney. But every single year he just ends up being a guy who's fantasy relevant for short stretches. Like, do you think this is Breida's job? Do you think this is Howard's job? Or is it just a mix of whoever they're feeling like that day?
Yeah, I kind of feel, unfortunately, and it's like a cop-out answer, but I kind of feel like that's how it's going to go, whoever they're feeling that day. I will give the edge right now to Jordan Howard. Both of these guys have, him and Breida, they haven't been able to really stay healthy, but I feel like Jordan Howard does get a lot of disrespect in the fantasy community. We always want to poke holes at him, and I'm not really sure why. maybe he's not that explosive, but year 1, 1,300 yards, year 2, 1,100 yards, year 3, almost 1,000 yards. And then really was the guy in Philadelphia. He was solid. He was the goal line back. He looked like the better back between him and Miles Sanders. It's just he had the shoulder injury and his season was absolutely over. So I think that he's going to be given an opportunity. It's just how healthy can he stay? Between both of those guys, Matt Breida and Jordan Howard, they like I said, they both have injury concerns where it probably will be a 60-40, 50-50, a split. You're playing guessing games. Who's going to be the goal line back there? Who's going to be catching balls in the backfield? Is probably going to be Breida, which will limit Howard, I think, his overall production. But I see Howard as maybe the first down back, second down back, and I think it's going to be a bloody mess. But I think there's an opportunity for, just value to grab one of these guys, and potentially one of them could touch the ball 20 times a game.
So Matt Breida right now, he's going around the 8th round, Joe. I think that's a worthwhile pick, depending on how your running back depth is shaking down. Because I think that if one of them is more likely to be the guy, it's Breida over Howard, just because they traded for him. He's younger. He's someone who constantly gets banged up too. So maybe the better investment might be like a 13th round Jordan Howard, or wherever he ends up going, if people feel like it's Breida over Howard. But I think you're going to get these guys on the cheap, if nothing else. And it could be one of them.
Yeah, I think they're bye week running backs. Breida, Howard, guys that you could plug in there for a week, 2 if you need them, and get by. And I think that that's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. You're going to need depth at the running back position. This is fantasy football. There's going to be a lot of injuries, a lot of issues, plus you have the bye week. So there's a lot to handle there. But if you are in any way, shape, or form relying on a running back that has MIA next to their name, I feel like it's going to be more of an MIA situation. And I think you need to really realize that you probably failed somewhere in your draft if you have to rely on these guys as bench depth, as bye week running backs. Okay. I mean, Chris was very astutely pointing out, we want to hate on Jordan Howard, but, he kind of gets the job done. Very, very unsexy, but he gets the job done. And Breida's had some moments, but there's real concerns whether or not he can be a lead back because he hasn't really had the opportunity nor the ability to kind of, show he can handle that workload. And Miami is going to be an offense that's going to be very hit and miss, I think. You're going to see weeks where Miami last year showed up and was really good, and other weeks where they were absolutely just putrid. And I don't think it's going to get better anytime soon. I do think Tua is going to play more than people realize this year. I am going to hold true to that. He is a competitor. He is absolutely just ferocious, and he's going to find a way to work his way to a point where they have no choice but to put him on the field for more games than I think people realize in 2020. But at the same time, unfortunately, looking at this running back situation, they are nothing more than bye week fillers, I think.
So what do you think of the strategy of making sure you get all of the running backs, the quote unquote volume running backs early, even if you pile up like 3 of them in the first 4 rounds, and then just not touching any of the quote unquote top end of the committee, likely to break out type guys, and then just taking the back end of the quote unquote committees in the 12th, 13th, 14th round and hoping to hit on one of them. Like, instead of taking Ingram, you take Dobbins. Instead of taking Swift, you take Kerryon, if that's the way that people play it. Instead of taking Mostart, you take Coleman. Instead of taking Taylor, you take Mack, or you take Howard over Breida, or when we get to some of these, like depending on how it shakes out, like Akers, Henderson, and Brown. Let's say that just comes down to Akers and Henderson with the Rams. Everyone loves Cam Akers. Well, it could be Henderson. Just take him in like the 14th round or whatever. And then if you can hit on one of those 3 guys, all of a sudden you've just manufactured a lot more out of what you can do on your squad for a lot less value and a lot less risk.
Yeah, I would agree with that strategy. I mean, I'm the type that likes to draft bell cows early anyways, and I think the wide receiver position is extremely deep this year. I think there's so much value. So if you go ahead and take care of a couple bell cow backs, the guys obviously we talked about in part 1 and some in part 2, yeah, you could take that strategy of running backs on especially good teams. You rattled off a couple running backs there. Like if Cam Akers, something happens to him or he doesn't, I think that he could be actually a pretty solid back with the Rams. But if he is,
but do we think do we think he's the number 1? And what does the number 1 on the Rams actually entail?
Yeah, I
That's a
mean,
better question.
that's a really good question, especially with what we talked about Todd Gurley and the usage, and Sean McVay giving Malcolm Brown carries randomly here and there. So that's a legitimate question. But yeah, I mean those are Madison too is another one. I'm not saying pass on Dalvin Cook, but there are some home run backs potentially if you hit on 2 or 3 of them a little bit later on that could work out. The biggest thing here with Howard and Breida is what we're talking about. Yeah, Miami is whatever, and yeah, they address the offensive line, but there's terrific value with both of these guys, maybe even more so with Howard, because people will draft Breida despite Breida never having more than 160 carries in a season, and Howard, hitting 250 3 times out of his 4 years. So there's terrific value on some of these guys who could play into larger roles as the season goes on in their teams.
Yeah, and I trying to define that role. Like Madison would be one thing, but he is a handcuff, I would think.
Yeah.
Like it's not like he's just going to be the guy over Dalvin Cook week 1. Surprise! It's now Madison's team. Dalvin Cook's going to be on the bench. With like Akers, we can pretend it's Akers, and this is talking right now. When we get into August, maybe this situation is completely clear. Same as the Taylor one. But if you are drafting at least relatively early, and even in July, you're probably not going to know the answer to these questions. That yes, let's say Akers is the number 1. Does that mean he gets 60%? Okay. Well, what if it's just randomly Henderson and he's the guy who gets 60%? That just makes him such a better value. Do you have any read on this situation, Joe?
No, I think this is kind of that whole thing where you just put your chips on a lot of different numbers and then hopefully just, by process of having more shares, somebody hits. And I think there's better scenarios than others. I think when you're looking there, you have to look at number 1, what's the offense allow itself to do? Number 2, look at the talent of the running backs too, that you're putting money and chips on and choose carefully. But this kind of goes back into this other scenario where you have these bell cow guys, you have a distinct group of them that you're really excited about, but also there, I think, is a very unique situation, whether it be some of these rookie running backs that have come in or some of these guys like Madison, second-year running backs that have shown you they can be very good. If Dalvin Cook is a holdout in the first couple of weeks of the season, then Madison becomes a guy you can play for the first month potentially. So there's so many scenarios with these guys where I don't ever remember being this excited for the backup guys or the guys that are later in drafts. And I think you have to pay attention to them. And I think buying them in bulk is smart because probably 3 of 5 won't hit. But if you have one of the other 2, I think you're in a really good situation because that gives you depth and it also gives you trade leverage later in the year to move one of those guys or somebody else on your roster and slide them into your active roster.
Pat, there's also a situation too, when you bring up Henderson and Akers, I just kind of thought about this, and the world that we're living in right now, we have to really kind of think about this, and I say quote unquote behind the 8 ball, but if training camps are going to be delayed and guys are not going to be with their teams and learning playbooks, like is Akers going to be the lead back in the first 4 weeks of the season, or is it going to be Darrell Henderson, who is with the team and started getting more reps and more play towards the end of the season? I know the Rams invested in Akers, but they also last 2 years ago traded up to get a guy in Henderson. Are they completely writing him off? Are they going to go with a committee? Is it going to take some time for some of these rookies? Keyshawn Vaughn, we want Keyshawn Vaughn to be the guy in Tampa Bay. He's a good pass blocker. Is he going to protect Brady? How often is he going to be able to pick up some of the blitzes that Brady wants him to pick up if he's not with the team and getting these reps and in the training camps and learning from this stuff? So this is something that maybe I'm overthinking, but some of these rookies, it could be a different year for them as opposed to other rookies.
I don't think you're overthinking it at all, Chris, personally. I think that's actually a fantastic point, and I think it really does favor, I know he hates to say it, but the Mark Ingrams of the world, possibly.
I mean, he can always listen. It's not too hard to impart how to trip over a 2-yard line to anyone. I'm not going to lie to you. It's pretty
well
clear
done, sir.
on how you do it. But like between Vaughn and between Jones, like, is there just a possibility that, I know this might be blasphemous to say, what if Tampa Bay sucks?
It's possible. I mean, and Vaughn is not necessarily, was he just Ronald Jones 2.0? I mean, it could be. I mean, it's nobody knows. And I think it's just going to be a very pass heavy offense. I think that's just what it's going to come down to. But the ironic part of that sounds really good in theory, but anybody who's watched the Patriots in the last 3 years, and God knows probably nobody watches them as much as I do, they've really propped Tom Brady up with an enormous amount of running game. I know it's speculative every week who that guy is going to be or how they do it, but the short yardage passing game and the running game of Sony Michel last couple of years and James White and even Deion Lewis before that, they have really done a very good job of putting Brady in a good situation to succeed by really changing and kind of pulling back what the offense was back in the day when it was Randy Moss and all these other guys, who was a little bit more high flying. It has not been nearly as high flying in the last couple of years, and it's been very, very conservative. But now all of a sudden you're telling me, or you're going to sell me on the fact that Brady's going to go to Tampa, and now all of a sudden he's going to throw for, I don't know, 5,000 yards, and it's going to all be fantastic. Maybe, but that's not the Brady I've been seeing the last couple of years. He's been a little bit more reserved, and yeah, it could be the offensive style and philosophy, but also could be a 42-year-old quarterback.
Meaney, where did Vaughn go in that athletic draft that you did? Did he go in the top 6 rounds, or did Jones go up there? Like, I'm having a hard gauge on. It feels like people are going to side with the rookie because the rookie is the new shiny thing.
Yeah, he went in the 6th round. To Jake, he paired up.
Did Jake
Clyde
only
Edwards-Helaire,
take rookies?
Fournette. Yeah, you know Jake loves his rookies, right?
He thought it was a
went
rookie
Clyde
draft,
Edwards-Helaire, Fournette, and then Keyshawn Vaughn. In the 6th round, these are backs that went in the 6th round: Ingram, Hunt, Montgomery, Keyshawn Vaughn. So I think in the 6th round, Keyshawn Vaughn, Joe, you bring up a great point. All the running backs that they've used, and a lot of those guys, Rex Burkhead is another one that can catch quick little dump offs. It's going to be very key, I think, for Keyshawn Vaughn to be able to pick up those blitzes. I don't think the offensive line is going to be as completely strong as in years past in New England. They're going to really have to protect Brady. I don't think that he can just go into Tampa Bay and throw the ball 40 plus times every single game. Like, that's just not something that he did in New England recently. But I think at that point, Keyshawn Vaughn in the 6th round, I think he's terrific. I don't want to put in the comparison of LeGarrette Blount, but I think LeGarrette Blount a couple years ago, as a guy that just racked up so many red zone rushing attempts and was the goal line back there, I think Vaughn could play maybe a similar role. But it is interesting that because Jones didn't really show us anything, and he wasn't great at pass blocking, is why Barber was in there, and was why he was getting goal line touches as well. So it'll be very key for Vaughn to be able to pick up those blitzes. I think is very important for him.
So the other big one, if we're just going to stick with the Tampa Bay running backs, let's go to New England. You have Sex Rex, he's still around, James White, Sony Michel, and Damian Harris, who you think would probably get into the mix at some point this year. And there's always going to be some random fullback who steals touchdowns away as well. Who knows? But, Joe, do you have a read on this backfield, and will it change now that Brady is gone? Like, if people expect the Patriots to probably try to win games by grinding it on the ground and playing defense, it could be a good Sony Michel aspect.
It could. I wouldn't dismiss Damian Harris either. I know this is going to sound wacky and like I'm building a narrative, but those two guys did play together growing up. So they're very familiar with each other. And now they happen to land on the same team in the NFL, which is a staggering thing when you consider the chances of that happening, not only both playing in the NFL, but on the same team. So I don't know what the comfort level is or where they're going here, but I think Sony Michel is probably the guy to start with, but it wouldn't surprise me if this is a real rotation this year too. And it's going to be fascinating. They are going to probably just run this weird rotation of all of these guys, and whatever's working, or they're going to have series planned for this guy, and then we're going to do the Rex Burkhead series, and then this group of plays. This is a team that's going to play defense, run the football, and be very careful with the football. In an era where everybody is trying to outscore everybody, they're going to do the opposite. And it wouldn't shock me if they were oddly successful doing it.
So, Meaney, what about the idea, let's say we think that New England is bad and maybe that they're losing some of these games. Does that mean James White is the best value? Maybe that wasn't just a Brady thing. Maybe that the screens, the dump offs to James White is just a part of this offense.
Yeah, I think so. I think Joe's absolutely right. They're going to rotate through all these guys. I mean, Brandon Bolden's still on the roster, not much Belichick.
Can't get rid of him. You can't kill Brandon Bolden no matter how you do. But I think White's the guy too, Meaney. I agree.
Yeah, the two that I'm interested in is White. To your point, Pat, I do think that there will be some dump offs and he'll be involved. I don't know Sony Michel, like. I have some concerns with him. I don't feel like I'm going to be able to draft him with confidence, but I think James White and Damian Harris, I think Harris is going to be pretty much free. And I think a lot of people forget that Joe, was he a 1st round pick 2 years ago?
Yeah, not first. It was early. So it was one of the two. He was a guy that they took and everybody went, huh, wow, I can't believe they did that. They have Sony Michel. Why would 2 years in a row they spent early draft capital on running backs, which is a very unpatriot-like thing to do. But they did, and I would still put my money on James White because this offense has always had that, whether it be Falk, whether it be, James White, Deion Lewis before him. It's always had that guy in the offense. So that's not going to change anytime soon. And when you're trying to prop up a rookie quarterback like Stidham or a second-year quarterback, wherever he is now, it's the idea of making sure that he can check down, find those guys, and be able to target them. And I'll tell you what, replacing Devlin too, I think one of those tight ends they drafted, the second kid, is going to be kind of like an H-back tight end H-back tight end / fullback kind of guy to replace Devlin, who retired, who was also a huge cog in that offense. This offense went south last year when Devlin got hurt. That was, people didn't realize their ability to run the football kind of died with Devlin, because they do run that fullback quite a bit. They do run that I formation out there, and they will play old school football. And they weren't able to do that last year, and the offense kind of fell apart in the second half. And a lot of people didn't realize that was the reason why. Now he's retired. Now they're going to try to build a new version of that, and we'll see how it goes. But it's going to be a backfield that's very, very difficult to deal with. White will be the one fantasy back. The other guys I would just kind of leave alone.
All right.
Yeah, 7 tight ends on this team, Pat. I mean,
is that all? They're going for the Bears record.
There's no question they want to run the football and rotate through a lot of these guys.
All right, I want a one-word answer, and we'll get out of here for part 4. If you had to draft one of these guys, and I think they're all going to go around similar type values here. Joe, we'll start with you. Darius Guice, Adrian Peterson, Phillip Lindsay, or Royce Freeman?
Give me Phillip Lindsay, because I always got to root for the little guy. And Melvin Gordon always gets hurt. But I said one answer, so Phillip Lindsay, sorry.
So, you know what? You like the little guys? We'll throw Tariq Cohen into that mix, too.
Still Phillip Lindsay.
Okay. Meaney?
Can't trust Nagy. Yeah, Phillip Lindsay for me, too. I can't get behind Guice. I just can't. There's so many backs in Washington right now.
Yeah,
I see the talent with Guice. It's just, guys there.
Can he stay healthy? Is Gibson going to play a role? Do they just turn it over to old man AP? Who knows? Anyway, that will do it on part 4 of the player-by-player previews at the running back position. I want to thank Chris Meaney at Chris Meaney on Twitter for being here. You can check him out at theathletic.com. You can check out Joe Pisapia as well. And remember to order the Fantasy Football Black Book off the Amazons.com. Joe, is that the best place to get it? Or can they just write you a letter and you'll send it to them?
Dear Joe, please send me a black book. No, you can get it on Amazon. You can get it for Kindle there, as well as the paperback version, which everybody loves to hold the black book in their hand, which is great. I love that about everybody. And you can also get it on iTunes as an ebook as well. So however you want to read the black book, if you want both, you want the paperback and the ebook, you want to kill a tree and have it to take with you wherever you are, you can do both. But always fun to talk football with you guys. This was a pleasure.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Remember, everyone out there, smash the like button, leave your DraftKings handle in the comment section, and tell me which running back, regardless of price, you just don't ever want to draft. My answer, Mark Ingram. But we all know that. And if you want to get into a draw for $100 DK, leave a 5-star review on the Pat Mayo Experience audio podcast, DraftKings handle, something you enjoy about the show, and boom, you'll be in that. Follow me at the PME, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and that'll do it. You want to check out the earlier versions of the show? Easy. Description. Video, podcast, along with the time codes for these ones, although that's probably irrelevant information to you at the very end of the show. Oh well, I'm Pat Mayo. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Pat Mayo Experience! Experience!